Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for coming in a few minutes late. And thank you very much for attending. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Global Dialogue series. It's called the Worsening Water Crisis. And thank you for taking your time to participate in our Global Dialogue. So in this series, we'll spend this semester discussing the worsening water crisis, featuring different case studies from selected sites across the globe. Over the course of the next few weeks, we'll build a virtual community and connect with people globally to reflect upon the material that will be presented. So we've designed the Global Dialogue series to have as much interaction and engagement as possible. So we'll have discussion boards and Q&A sessions. We hope that you'll find your experience with this series to be insightful and engaging. We hope that you'll stay connected not only to us here at Think and D, but also to the global community we intend to build over the course of the next few weeks. So again, at this time, I'd like to thank all of our co-sponsors of the Global Dialogue series. So Notre Dame International, the Office of the President, all of our university colleges and schools, and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. It has been a team effort, and all team members have put in so much of their time and talents to bring this program to life from its original conception. And today I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to discuss the impact of water and sanitation and hygiene security on women and girls in low-income countries with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the disproportionate responsibility of women to take care of family members' sanitation and hygiene needs while sharing communal facilities for bathing and toilet use with many other members of the community, women have been at a high risk for both airborne and waterborne illnesses. This is further exacerbated by socio-cultural norms that place pressure on women to provide for their family needs while being unable to properly utilize the scarce water available within their family home. This complex and often interconnected problem confronts women and increasingly undermines their physical, mental, as well as their reproductive health. So, to kick us off, we ask that if you have any questions for Professor Ellis, Adjei, Adams, please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. This will allow us to facilitate the questions as effectively as possible as they come in, and we'll try and answer as many of them as possible given the time constraint. So again, let me welcome Professor Ellis, Adjei, Adams. As you may know, when we promoted this event, we shared a few pre-recorded videos that were posted on the Think and D website. And Professor Adams discussed a few themes from the recommended reading. For those of you who've not had a chance to watch it, I recommend that you go to the Think and D website. The recording in brief just talks about how lack of water sources within residents in many African countries makes women and girls go to wait for long hours in lines to fill containers for water in their family, and this exposes these individuals to risks such as COVID-19, sexual assault, gender-based violence, and mental health risks. I'll not speak much about it. I'll let my colleague, Professor Adams, to speak about it. So I'd like to welcome Professor Adams. He's from the Keough School of Global Affairs and studies environmental policy. And today he'll be able to talk to us about environmental policy and governance in Malawi. Thank you, Professor Adams. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacqueline, for the introduction. Thanks to everyone who is joining us. There is a lot to share within an hour or so. This is a topic that I can teach a whole semester on and still not even finish with my students, the various aspects of water. So I think I would have us go more direct with questions and allow Jackie to cut in when my answer starts getting long, because it's an area that I have a lot of passion for. So there is a lot obviously to say, but my hope is that there will be some interesting takeaway messages by the end of today's session. So thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate everyone who is joining from everywhere.
Thank you, Professor Adams. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jackline Oluoch. I'm Dr. Jackline I'm the Director for NDI's presence in Nairobi, based out of Nairobi, Kenya. I somehow feel like everybody knows me in the ND community, so I'm sorry about that. So just to quickly jump in, so Professor Adams, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in this area of water and water governance? Why did you start with this work, and how did this come to be your research focus?
All right, thank you, Jackline. So wherever I give a talk, I say that I count myself very fortunate to study something that I've experienced. So a lot of what I talk about, even though I learned through my research, but a lot of it also comes from a place of experience. So as a young boy in rural Ghana growing up, I can recollect many days that I couldn't go to school because my mother said there is no water at home. And you might think that, well, if there's no water at home, you can still go to school without taking your shower. But it wasn't just simply water. It was the other things my mother needed water to do. And so a good example is that if there's no water, then there is no food because you need the water to cook the food. So when I got to the university and studied natural resources management, it just came natural that the water was something I was very interested in. So when I was doing my senior thesis, I decided to focus on water. But at the time, my main focus on water was more the quality of water. So trying to understand pollution of water, what kinds of contaminants are in water. And it was really fascinating to learn as much as I could at the time on that topic while doing my senior thesis. But I ended up after school working for an NGO that was basically building boreholes in communities that did not have water. And the more I worked for the NGO, the more I realized that the problem, at least in the context of Africa, is more social than we recognize. And so I started getting more interested in policy, because the issue has more to do with decision-making to address the issue. If you take Malawi, for example, it has Lake Malawi, which is the 9th largest lake in the world by volume. But why does it lose so many children to cholera and contaminated water? So there's something about the issue that goes beyond water as a result. So I started getting into policy during my master's work when I moved to the United States. And then through my PhD in the past 10 years or so, from 2012, been focusing both on understanding access to water, but also how policies can help us address some of the challenges that we see on the field. So I've done work in Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, Uganda, Brazil, and also have some work in Atlanta, Georgia, where we are looking at water access and environmental injustice. So in short, that's sort of why I'm very passionate in this area. Everything I learn really takes me back to my own background and the things I experienced growing up.
Wow, thank you for that introduction, Ellis. So you've done water research all over the world, all the way from Ghana to Atlanta in the US. That's very interesting, your diverse perspective. So let's talk about this bigger picture that you describe. Is there really a global water crisis going on based on all this research in these different places? And what would be the consequences of such a global crisis?
So it's a difficult question in a way, because how you answer depends on where you stand. As a researcher, I am more on the side of the fact that we have a crisis, but we also have an opportunity to do something about the crisis. It's easy to sort of divide the crisis into contexts, right? And so it's not one big global crisis that is the same everywhere. Some places have less water, some places have more water than they need in terms of flooding. Some places have better infrastructure, other places have weak infrastructure. So we could say, yes, there is a crisis, but what's important is to understand the very different manifestations of that crisis in different parts of the world. Now, as a premise, let me say that it's easy to think that we have a lot of water, but the part of water that we can actually use very easily is also the least abundant. And I think that's a good premise to begin with, that the oceans account for about 97% of all the water that we have globally. And so we have 2.5% that we can use readily. But even with that 2.5%, you also have the water that is locked underground, what hydrologists will call aquifers. So you cannot use that readily unless you pump it from underground. So what we usually see, the lakes, rivers, springs, things that we can easily see in terms of water constitute actually less than 1% of all the water that we have. When you begin from that premise, it's easy to agree that we are in a crisis, because then you know that we are doing very poorly managing the little that we have, or we have very little understanding of how we manage it. So what I would do is to go through about 6 different dimensions of the crisis to illustrate my point that the crisis isn't the same everywhere, right? And that depending on the context where you find yourself, the crisis might manifest differently. So the first is the crisis of overuse. We are using much more water than we should. Obviously, agriculture is the biggest culprit here. And that is in part not as much because we are inefficient with how we use water. Actually, we are doing better being efficient in terms of technology when we think about irrigation and other things. But the simple fact is that we have many more people in the world, right? And so the more people you have, the more water you obviously use. So that is the aspect of the crisis of overuse. Now, naturally, we are supposed to use the surface water so that the groundwater will replenish it, so that over time we continue to have access to surface water. The more we overuse, the more we begin to tap underground into water that is supposed to actually be a backup source, right, to refill the surface water sources that we use. So that is the first crisis. The second, related to use, is the crisis of globalization and virtual water. There is much more water than we realize because water is embedded in the things that we use, right? And so our cotton shirts, our handbags comes with leather processing that uses water. There is so much water that moves around globally. And there's a major crisis because things are being produced where they shouldn't be produced. So there's a mismatch in terms of where you have a lot of water, where you have little water, and where things are being produced. So a good example would be, say, producing alfalfa in California, which is dry and which you would basically consider a desert, and ask the question, why isn't that grown, say, in the Great Lakes region where there is much more water? So that mismatch is a big part of the crisis, the way we see it, that more and more water is used to produce not just food, but also the meat that we use, the materials that we use. And so water is embedded in this, what we often call virtual water. For me, as a researcher working in Africa, the most troubling aspect of the crisis, to me, and many will agree, is the lack of basic water, right? So water is useful for many things, but what you drink in a safe form is your fundamental need as a human being. But unfortunately, that is a major crisis that right now, even by conservative estimates, we know that almost 2 billion people have no access to safe drinking water. And when we talk about access, we don't even mean that access at home. You may walk to get your water, but it has to be available when you need it. And that just simply isn't there, and that's a major crisis. 2 other crises I will touch on before we move on to other things is the crisis of infrastructure. So you might have water, but water has to move where people are. So again, Malawi is a good example. Lake Malawi might be many miles from where people live. So how do you get water to people? A lot of infrastructure in Africa has existed for decades. They are weak, they leak water. So a lot of water is lost when you actually move water to communities for people to use. And in the US, the story is no different. If you think about what happened in Flint, if you think about pipes that are corroding, issues with lead, then we have a major crisis about how we transport water to people, which connects to the infrastructure, but also how we treat water. And then finally, the crisis of too much water, which is flooding. And that's an unfortunate paradox that we are talking about a crisis of no water, but there are many places where there is more water than they need, especially with climate change inducing rainfall, acute rainfall. And so there you see flooding and people drowning in water, other things, because the water is the water comes at a time when people don't have need for it, or it's too contaminated simply to use for basic needs.
Wow, thank you, Professor Ellis. This is quite a range of crises. I think that's the plural of the word crisis. And you've really walked us through these 6 dimensions, ranging from overuse to flooding to availability to the infrastructure of water. I think drilling down to where you've done most of your recent work in Malawi, maybe you can talk to us about the processes involved in getting water. I know you touched on it in some of the crises. Maybe you can now walk us through, how do people get water in Malawi, where you've done your research?
Okay. So yeah, Malawi would be consistent with many parts of Africa in terms of how these challenges that I will talk about play out. But the most important point is that in Malawi, many other countries, you are looking at a population where over 75% do not have water at home. So what does that tell us? That you have to move to get your water. To move to get your water involves the walking. It involves the cost of time to wait before you get the water. It involves the cost of storing the water, because you're not guaranteed that your water will be available every day, right? And so that's the major dimension. And then it comes with whether the infrastructure, the water points, can actually serve communities. So you might enter a typical urban slum in Malawi where there are about 10 water points for a community of, say, 2,000 to share. But then out of the 10, maybe 8 are not even functioning. So you also have to deal with water points that are not functioning. So it's hard to plan your life, not knowing where your water would come the next day, because it's basically every day you decide and you move and you go and find water. But some of the research I've been doing recently is trying to understand decision-making around water and what it entails. And I think what's important to recognize is that it's so easy to think that if you live in the US, you turn on your tap, you get your water. If you're in Malawi, well, we understand you have to walk to get your water, and we understand walking is hard and you have to carry heavy buckets. But what's concerning is the conflicting decisions households have to make before they can get water. So I will just give you a good example that for a typical or an average woman in Malawi, before you leave home to go and get your water, you are thinking about what's the shortest route. You have to think about how much money you have and whether it's enough for all the water you need that day. With that also comes the decision of whether you want to just go for the water you would drink from the tap and take your laundry to the river, which you know that it's just unsafe or contaminated. But you also have to think about what size is your family, how much water do you need? And if you are poor and you cannot store water, that implies more trips to the water source. More trips also comes with the trade-off of what would you have done with the additional time you are spending waiting if you were at home? You could be cooking for your children. And so women are every day undergoing these very complex decision-making trade-offs that in some of our work, we actually plotting it into like a decision tree, looking at every step of the way and what kind of thinking and emotional burden comes with just getting a bucket of water. And it can be as bad as women telling me that we decided not to wear shoes to the water source because we know that if we go without shoes, we would come back home faster because it's faster to walk without shoes in the kinds of terrain that they walk. And when we get to the health implications, I will share more about what kinds of exposures women worry about when it comes to access to water.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Professor Ellis. You described quite an interesting scenario that plays out quite similarly in a lot of African countries, including here in Nairobi in Kenya. We have many people sharing a water point in some of the urban slum settings that are present in some cities in Africa. And the challenges are similar: water, distance, multiple decisions. And so in these challenges that you describe, do you think that there are communal expectations around the women and water? Do people around these women expect something from the women?
Yes, and that's something that troubles me a lot when I visit communities where I'm working, that water is viewed as such a feminine resource that women cannot even negotiate their way out, right? And part of it is just the culture. So some of the work we are trying to understand, where do these expectations, where did they come from? Why is water viewed? And we can blame culture, we can blame taboos, but globally for a long time, we tended to think that anything domestic water is women, at least in low-income countries. That is the case, right? So all of those have come together to really elevate this expectation that women cannot give excuses. And part of it also ties in with what I just described, that when a woman is thinking about the water they need, they are maybe thinking about food, for example, that they will cook, right? And so let's just take a step back and unpack what that means. What kinds of expectations are there? It's not just the water, but there is the expectation also about the things water is needed for, right? And so food is one, cleaning that you will clean. So the less water is available, the more these expectations get very heightened. And so women will share stories such as, well, the water is not flowing, but my husband is upset that the dishes are still dirty because it could harbor bacteria. But there simply isn't water, right? And then there are a lot of contradictory processing, mental processing that women have to do. So I have a project that I've written about, which looks at masculinity and women's experiences around water. And it's very fascinating that a woman might tell you that I'm really worried that there is no water. And the main reason there is not so much the water, but the fact that during lunchtime, maybe they will not be able to make tea for their husband who is working in the city and comes back to eat for lunch, for example. So that tells us that water is simply not water, but it has all these cascading impacts that come with the expectations of what women need to do in some of these communities. The final thing that worries women a lot is also the process of getting water and what that means in terms of women's health, right? And so some of our work, we've used videos to just look at the environment where women fetch water. And in Malawi, we just did for 25 women fetching water, and we were able to identify over 400 physical risks that comes with sharp objects that they could step on, ditches that they need to jump over, drainage channels, very slippery terrain where they could easily fall down, narrow path that they have to navigate, so many different things. So that tells us that when a woman tells you that I'm worried about my water situation, you really have to unpack what are sort of the undertones of that worry and what could they be expressing, because it's simply not just the water, it's all the other things that come with not having water that often brings that kind of burden, emotional burden on women. And again, the fact that families are expecting you to perform non-negotiably your role in fulfilling water needs at home come with a huge challenge.
Wow. Thank you for that, Professor Ellis. It's quite interesting how there are all these different issues playing around water, like the culture, the domestic expectations, the communal expectations that you so well describe, and the physical risks. It's a lot happening around water. And maybe now to switch gears a little bit, maybe tell us about some of the solutions that are proposed. You being a policy scholar, how does policy play into trying to help the situation with women and water?
Yeah, so globally, there have been attempts to try to improve the situation for women, right? A lot of the attempts often will clash with culture. It's just not consistent with local customs, right? Like I said, water is very feminine. So if you go to Malawi, where I work, you talk to men, you might have one man saying, when my wife is pregnant, I would help, for example, fetch water. But overall, men do not want to do that unless they can add some masculine aspect to water fetching, like owning a bicycle where you tie gallons on it, right? So there's a lot of disconnect between global policies and local processes. So some of the attempts that have been made, I don't know if you are familiar with the Millennium Development Goals. There was a focus on environmental sustainability where it was assumed that women's responsibilities could be addressed at national levels. And then in the current Sustainable Development Goals, there is also emphasis on gender equality, also on water, considering that women play a very crucial role in managing water, particularly at home. The danger in why we are failing with a lot of global policies aimed at incorporating women's needs is that it often stops at political participation, right? And so a lot of countries, Bolivia, Rwanda, many countries are aiming to enhance women's participation in policy making, but it would often be, say, women in the parliament. Rwanda is a good example. 61% of sort of the political appointees might be women. The unfortunate situation is that might not necessarily imply that women are playing a crucial role in the water sector. Right? So there is a lot of action at the macro level, not so much the micro level where water decision tends to be made. And that's where we need to do better, where a country might say that, oh, we have a policy that generally enhances women's participation, but you have to go forward, step forward to make it more specific across different sectors in order for that to happen. So that's a major issue that sort of we are trying, at least making the case as we write papers, that there's the need to centralize women's issues around water and give women more room and space to contribute to decision making, around water. And finally, one more thing, just generally about policy, is also just doing better with how we coordinate policy, right? So there's a women's education issue. There are girls who are losing education. There is the health dimension when it comes to menstruation and other things that impede education and school attendance. So we have to weave this together in a way that makes sense, at least for policymakers to understand the various interconnections.
Thank you, Ellis, for speaking on the policy level up there. And I think you described quite articulately the gap between policy and the interventions on the ground that should be context specific, that would bring women to the surface. Maybe just in that line of thought, your work has touched on water user associations in Malawi, I think as a country-based intervention to deal with the water crisis. Maybe you can talk to us about such interventions and, moving away from policy, what a country is doing on the ground to try and help, patch some of these gender disparities in water.
Okay, thanks for the question. Yeah, so a lot of the work I've done in Malawi, just looking at women's representation in water user associations, which are basically community water user groups coming together either through an election or through an appointment process to manage water either in partnership with the state or just as standalone committees. And in Malawi, I've worked on about 6 water user associations, and there's one woman that sits on the board, on the executive board level, which means that a lot of women that would even tell you that they are members or they are part of the association are often more the lower ranks where no decisions are made, right? So the places where the shots are called, where the most important decisions are made, tend to be dominated by men. And there is some historical reasons for that, that women are often reluctant in some ways to come forward because they tend to be less educated in these areas. In Malawi, it's the same, that men are relatively more educated than women. So women, even though they know so much about water at home, might think that sitting in some office to make decisions about water might require some formal education that they don't have, right? Number 2 is the issue of availability. So you might make provisions for women to participate in water governance, but if your provisions doesn't take care of obstacles at home, it is basically a policy on paper, which is what we are learning in Malawi, right? And so you will say that the Constitution says that women should be given equal chance to participate in water user associations. But the same constitution says that to be able to be elected to board membership, you have to make time to campaign. You need to go through the community door to door asking for people to vote for you. Forgetting that, first of all, it's a very masculine society where women cannot just go anywhere to another house soliciting for votes. Or in another instance, that women are taking care of so much at home that they don't have the time to campaign. So here's a good example of where representation does not mean active participation, right? It just becomes a tokenistic model where all you can prove is that on paper, we are so open to women participating without asking questions about why they aren't, even though those spaces have been opened. So what's the lesson there? That beyond making room and creating the spaces, you have to deal with the obstacles at home. Education, how would men understand that women actually have a lot to contribute when it comes to how water should be managed, rather than men making decisions but women handling the water, right? And one fascinating thing I've learned in Malawi is how much women are actually coming up with their own norms to share water at the water point in ways that men just have no idea. Right, so we've seen places where women will say everyone has 5 buckets. How about each household gets 1 bucket, so that we ensure that everybody gets 1 bucket before one person gets 2 buckets. And it's all women coming up with these very innovative ways to make sure that they take care of each other and each other's family's needs, right? And so they obviously have a lot to contribute, but we have to do better. It's important that we create the policies on paper, but it's more important that we remove the obstacles. Otherwise, the policies basically are just as good as being on paper without ensuring that there is actual change.
Oh, thank you. This is fascinating. And I like how you describe women's ability to adapt and have egalitarian solutions to their own water problems. And I believe that this should be sieving upwards towards policy, informing what the political decision makers are deciding on how to manage water. I think that's very, very interesting, the way community interventions work vis-a-vis how policy is made and viewed. So very interesting work in Malawi. You said you work in Ghana, you work in Kenya. Maybe you can give us a little bit of contrast between, maybe I'll choose Kenya because I'm Kenyan, between Malawi and Kenya.
Yeah, so actually there are, I've done some work on what they call delegated water management in Kisumu, Kenya, with a colleague who worked there. I think one important distinction between Kenya and Malawi, did you say Kenya and Malawi?
Yes.
Okay, is that there is a lot more entrepreneurial solutions with how women and communities respond to water in Kenya than in Malawi. And that has to do with, if you're familiar with water tankers that go around distributing water in Nairobi, for example, or what we typically call water vendors. So people will collect water in gallons and go and sell. So there are a lot more non-state type solutions to water in Kenya than you will see in Malawi. What that means is that in Malawi, more people are waiting on the state to step in and intervene rather than take matters into their own hands and try to fix that. I think that a function of that is just how urbanized the country is. Malawi is still largely rural. So even spaces they call urban might not be as crowded as urban spaces in Kenya, right? And the more you urbanize, the more people get more economically open to ideas about taking advantage of challenges and trying to turn them into commercial solutions. So that's a major distinction there that I can speak to.
Quite interesting. So depending on the type of state you have, the solutions differ with your country context. So going back to the context that you spoke about in the crisis, what kind of crisis do you have? Water crisis in your context? Interesting, very interesting. As I wind down the questions, maybe now I'll just ask you, what can the audience do to act? You know, what are the little things that the audience can do to conserve water in their settings? Because you mentioned the US also has some water crisis challenges. How do they learn more? How do they stay informed? How do they get involved?
Okay. All right, thank you. So a couple of things. If you are in love with Notre Dame, there's a lot of very fascinating water work happening here. We have the Environmental Change Initiative, ECI, and recently a new group has formed within the ECI called H2O at ND. So there's a website of it where you can find out more about all the water research or people involved in water research. There is World Water Day coming every year. World Water Day is about March 22nd. And there is always a team. This year is on groundwater, making the invisible visible. If you remember, I spoke about groundwater and why it's so easy to overuse because we cannot see it with our eyes unless we pump. So that's one. At the individual level, I just want to call on people to just think around water that even if it's abundant around you, it's not abundant everywhere. So every little thing you can do to conserve counts. And sometimes it's just a matter of even researching the appliances you use, your washer, your shower head. Are there ones that are more efficient? Just so we think that it's a crisis around many parts of the world, but the little you can do is to be more conservative, just as a way of contributing to how we use water wisely and sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ellis. That's very profound. So all the little things that we take for granted daily, thank you for informing us and informing the community about events that are available to their reach on the ND campus and around. So I think we've come to the end of our question and answer session between me and Professor Adams. So we'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. And I think there was one in the chat. So there's a question from Karen Bell, and she asks, were there specific characteristics of Malawi as a country or community that made it a good base for your work?
So full disclosure, my PhD advisor is Malawian. So when I started my PhD, every PhD student wants to change the world with their dissertation. So I started saying I would do Ghana and Malawi together. Eventually, I dropped Ghana and focused on Malawi because it just had much more pressing water needs. But if you know the history of Malawi, it also had its fair share of the HIV pandemic. So there are a lot of orphans in that country. It struggles on the US Human Development Indices, where they rank countries by level of development. Malawi has consistently been in like the bottom 10, sometimes even the bottom 3. Right, so Malawi makes me think about a place where you do research that can make a difference in communities, because there are certainly other countries in Africa, Kenya, Ghana, doing relatively better. And Malawi is also landlocked, so it has its own issues, right? For the lakes that they focus on. So for me, Malawi, it's almost a place I call second home. I've made a lot of amazing friends there, but you also can see very visibly the issues around water, kids dying before age 5 due to cholera, things that are so preventable, either because a mother makes infant formula with water that is unsafe. Very simple things that could require very simple solutions. And it breaks my heart that happens and you keep hearing those stories. So I continue to do work there. And it's really partly due to these kinds of reasons.
Thank you, Ellis, for that explanation as to why you chose Malawi for your work. We have another question from Jack Looney. I'd asked the moderator to unmute him so that he can ask it live.
Okay.
Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. My question, you mentioned before about, there being progress on the state and like the macro level. There were like larger initiatives that say it was kind of helping, with availability for water, but there wasn't as much being done on the micro and the local level. Can you think of a success story that might have happened on the micro or the local level that like we can use as a benchmark for what we should be striving towards, etc.?
Yeah, so I mean, even Malawi, where there are a lot of challenges, I consider a lot of the papers that I've written, I will argue that the community-based solutions are largely successful, which means I don't still view it as a panacea, that it addresses everything, right? But it's a good model in that it brings communities closer to the government. It provides a channel where they can continue to ask for the things they need in terms of water. It gives them some capacity to take care of the simple things rather than wait on the government. So that would be a good model. In Tanzania, there have been a lot of small-scale solutions at the community level, similar to what we've seen in Malawi, where you can call it a success. There's always a caveat there, right? It's been successful, but. And so the goal is to look at how we can improve the buts or the other aspects that we didn't see the success. And it often comes down to the state providing not just financial capital, but human resource, the technologies that communities will need. So, I mean, there are good examples. The issue is that they are very small scale, right? And so if you take Malawi, for example, with all the people in Malawi, if you have 2 or 3 communities that are successful, it is almost like a drop in the bucket in terms of the scale of the problem, right? So part of what we need to do is to think about, if one is successful, how do we scale it up? If something worked at the level of one community, can we see it working sort of at a larger scale? On irrigation, we've seen a lot of good things happening in South Asia and other places. Actually, women's associations doing well managing water. So those are also some success stories that we have heard. And we just need more and more and to continue to learn, because like I said earlier on, you might say Malawi's model is a success, but I'm the same person saying how that same model has relegated women to the background, right? So you need to know how to weigh the pros and cons and what kind of overall argument you can make in terms of whether that model is generally successful or not, based on what you are learning in terms of the good and the bad.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Adams, for that. We have a few more questions lined up. So one question asks, can Professor Ellis elaborate on the impact of COVID and the access to water in Malawi? The impact of COVID and to access, I think. Okay.
Yeah, so I think generally Africa has been spared with COVID, at least if we compare it to the US, at least now. And countries have been battered. We knew a strain came from South Africa. So there have been countries there that have had their own issues. I've written a couple of papers looking at COVID and how it affected women in particular. A lot of the education on COVID, as we know, centered on washing hands regularly, right? And so what that meant is that already women are under a lot of pressure to fetch water. So if households are cleaning more regularly, hands are being washed more regularly, cleaning is being done more regularly, then it elevates the anxiety women have about trying to satisfy these kinds of communal expectations. Okay, so that's at the household level. And then other concerns with going to queue for water and potentially being exposed. That now you need water to manage COVID at home, but you don't have water at home. So you have to go where people are, potentially expose yourself, but your goal is to get water so you can manage hygiene at the household level. So generally, we've not done too bad as a region in Africa. I mean, there are still cases, but I also want to say that there were some good interventions to get ahead of COVID in certain countries, especially around water, right? So Ghana is one. Ghana did what they call free water intervention, where communities were given water for 6 months so that people didn't have an excuse to not wash hands regularly. Uganda also tried that. We saw that in, I think DR Congo had similar interventions as well. I don't know much if Kenya did things. Other countries tried what they call cash transfer. So basically, instead of giving people water, they would give them just something, money, something small, to give you a chance to buy water rather than try to give you the water. What we have learned is that unfortunately, a lot of these interventions didn't actually get to the people that needed the interventions. And there's one major reason why. And that is that a lot of people use water off a meter, right? So if in the US, your water use is metered. So all a government or a state government needs to do is to say that this man don't pay your water bill. But in communities where people don't have meters, you have no way to track water use. And you have no way to forgive the debts that people have around water. And so those were the major impediments to how those policies work. So in Ghana, for example, what the government tried to do was to say that those who sell water to communities, give the water for free, we will pay you the cost later. But there was so much mistrust that even if they gave the water for free, the government will not pay the money back. So what ended happening is that it's all over the media, in the newspapers, that, oh, water is free to Ghanaian citizens. But in practice, many people didn't actually get the free water simply because it's such a long chain in terms of how you get your water. Someone buys it, then they sell it to you, then you also sell your water to someone. And so the intervention didn't quite work. And part of it is just the government doesn't understand the geography of water supply and the things that you need to take care of for a policy to work, right? And so what that tells us is that sometimes policies also need better understanding of the context and what the impediments are. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work. Much as the policy might sound very good. I mean, who doesn't want free water? But it just didn't get to people.
Thank you. Thank you for that explanation on the policy context and how governments are failing to match what needs to be done on the ground. There's some more questions. So one is from Fritz Hein, who asks, which countries or cities are doing well on water issues and what stands out about their efforts? Is desalination a viable way to help assist in the water crisis?
That's a tough one. I mean, desalination can be a very compelling solution. And we already seen that in Netherlands, Jordan, Middle East, where there is so much drought and drier environment. They are taking the salt out of the sea, and desalination has been a major technology. It will continue to grow. Let's keep in mind that desalination is very energy intensive. So if you think about developing countries, it just doesn't seem the ideal solution. And I particularly argue that if you have a lot of rivers and lakes that you can treat to supply, you have no business trying to go the route of desalination. It can be like a last option if you are really dry and do not have access to water. And in Africa, desalination experiences have been embedded in a lot of corruption also, right? So the government wants to have a connection with some company that will build a desalination plant. And in the end, you know, government ministers are basically looking at how to get a contract and spend the money, knowing very well that desalination just doesn't work in those contexts. A lot of the desalination models we've seen in developing countries also have come with technologies that do not remove the salt well from the water. Ghana again comes to mind there. Some of my work, I was trying to look at that. So local communities were complaining a lot that the water from the desalination plant was salty. What does that tell us? That it wasn't really removing the salt. So the water tasted very salty. And that also means that you are potentially creating conditions for hypertension and other things if there's too much sodium in the water that communities are consuming because the desalination process isn't done well, right? But that is not to say that desalination cannot, it will be a great supplementary solution in those environments, but really after you've taken care of your other sources of water, because they are way cheaper and you don't have to think about the energy intensity that you need to sort of have that water, salt removed from the water to give to people.
Thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive answer on desalination. Now, I think we'll take one last question because of the constraints of time. So there's a question on whether Professor Adams works with Charity Water or has any favorite water charities that he works with, and you're thanked for your presentation.
So yeah, let me just say that, I've worked with a lot of water charities, but not as a way to promote them. It's just for them to lead me to the communities where they work, so I have access to understand as water aid, water for people. There's so many out there, but it's not a platform to recommend what you do, but there's so many online, and always look at their track record. There are a lot of one-man charities where maybe the impact doesn't go as far as it could, but you could just do your own research and just find out more before you commit any resources.
Thank you, Professor Adams. I know that we're running short on time and we have to wrap up. So we thank you all for your questions. The remaining questions will be channeled to Professor Adams and he'll respond. So our moderators have taken them up. We're sorry that we can't take them live, but we're very grateful. So we'd like to thank you guys. We'd like to thank Professor Ellis Adams for giving us a very, very fascinating talk on water and taking time from his busy schedule. Thank you very much, Professor Adams. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. We invite you to continue the conversation on the discussion board we set up on LinkedIn. And next week, we travel to Kailimo Global Gateway, where we'll discuss coastal storms on the west coast of Ireland. There's some videos on Think and D with short explainer videos by Professor Andrew Kennedy from the School of Environmental Engineering. So please review and come prepared to discuss next week. And please feel free to share this series with your friends. We're accepting registrations throughout the entire program, as each meeting can stand alone. Thank you, everyone. And thank you. Have a good afternoon for those in the US and a good night for those in Africa. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.